Alright, ladies and gentlemen, it's now been a few weeks since the teaser trailer for Superman released, and today I want to go over one of the biggest questions coming out of the trailer that have led to the biggest fan discussions and theories. And this surrounds, of course, the main villain, Lex Luthor, and his big bad plan against Superman. And with Lex entering the Fortress of Solitude and some other teasers in the trailer, there's actually quite a lot that we can dive into here. Now also, let me know if you enjoyed this type of video, as I think this could be a part of a series of dedicated videos on specific characters and plot points that I can make separate videos about, all coming from what we've been teased with so far from the trailers and existing big theories out there. So ever since the theatrical version of the trailer released containing a couple of extra shots, including this one, a lot of us have been wondering about this scene right here, which shows Lex Luthor, the Engineer, and I'm just going to say Ultraman, because I know some people are like, it's Ulysses, it's not Ultraman. None of us know for sure, even though toy leaks seem to suggest Ultraman more than Ulysses and whatnot. But either way, I'm going to say Ultraman for the purpose of this video, entering the Fortress of Solitude. And yes, I'm confidently saying that because I think it's fairly obvious that this is the Fortress of Solitude, with that being the main entrance gate behind them, being slightly open. And you can also see the crystal archway entrance in the reflection of Luthor's glasses. Not to mention, he's wrapped up pretty warm, and those choices of sunglasses are also very fitting for a very icy, bright white location. Now, this question at first may seem obvious to many of you, like, why would Lex want to go in the fortress? It's kind of like, well, why wouldn't Lex want to go into the fortress? Of course he would. Lex finding the fortress and having a chance to peek into Superman's HQ is just exciting enough for him, with all of the various opportunities that could present. But there's clearly something that he's seeking that would tie into the larger plot than just a simple behind-the-scenes tour while Superman isn't around. So first of all, we can assume that Superman, of course, isn't there at this point for them to be able to go there in the first place. And as I briefly mentioned, I know the trailer shots aren't chronologically shown, but I'm going to assume that Superman, at least for the sake of this video, has been temporarily bested by Ultraman and the Engineer, which gives Lex the opportunity to go into the fortress in the first place, for likely then Superman to return by the time that Luthor and the others are gone, to then find his own fortress robot destroyed or near destroyed, as shown in this shot in the teaser trailer. And you could also chuck in the whole theory of, at this point, Superman could even be in that metahuman containment facility that we also saw in a trailer, which is housing various other powered individuals. Now, quick side note here, and just another interesting question to ponder, is given James Gunn has stated that the fortress erupts out of the ground whenever Superman goes there, which is handy to keep it hidden in between. How did Lex manage to activate this Fortress of Solitude in the first place? That is a question that remains open for now, and not so much the focus of this video, but I guess, it could be the use of a kryptonian artifact that Lex has somehow acquired before this point, but that would then raise the question of how would he have even obtained such a thing that would resonate with the fortress? Perhaps a recovered meteorite from Clark's arrival on Earth, if Luthor has dug deep enough there. More on that a little bit later. But either way, before I ramble too much about a whole separate thing, back to the reason as to why he's there. There's a few ideas that have been rummaging around. One, of course, you could just say that, he's there to destroy the place. Simple as that. Well, sure, you could say that maybe Luthor would love to do that, but I don't think he would just go there just to simply do that without taking something valuable away. And we know from the trailer, to some extent, that he's already got the Engineer and Ultraman to do some damage there. But I think, we can all agree that the sole motive of Lex Luthor going into the Fortress of Solitude to just wreck the place for mere troll reasons isn't the main reason that will link to the larger story at play in the movie. So next up, there's of course the possibility to learn more about Superman, which kind of seems self-explanatory, of course, and how his powers work. Perhaps even get a hold of some Kryptonian technology, which will play into another larger point we're going to discuss in just a minute. But most importantly, all of this will help aid in the plot of which I've been theorizing about, and that is for Lex wanting to smear and defame Superman's image to the world. Now, this particular talking point actually bleeds and ripples out into various ideas for the plot of the movie that we've been discussing on the channel. So, as far as going into the fortress to find something that he can use against Superman, sure, that is quite likely. I mean, if there is something that he can learn there about Superman that he can weaponize, let's say kryptonite or something that leads to kryptonite, that would be very handy to Lex because, by this point of the movie, Ultraman and The Engineer could have worn him down quite a lot with that fight in the stadium. Obviously, again, we don't know what point of the movie that's at. There's the part where he lands in the Arctic at the beginning of the trailer. When I say wear him down, I mean fighting him without kryptonite. Obviously, the power scaling of Superman in this iteration, in this DCU, is something that has still yet to be determined, but obviously Superman, even without kryptonite, if he's kind of tag teamed enough, can feel a little bit of a beating. I know that's up to debate, but I think in this iteration, Clark can be bashed around a little bit when going up against something like a kaiju and not feel right as rain, even without the use of kryptonite. So let's just say, hypothetically, sure, Superman can kind of get run down, but Lex still might not have found the ultimate weakness to Superman. Because I think the reason as to why Lex goes to the Fortress of Solitude with the Engineer and Ultraman here, or what he ultimately learns there, is actually a lot bigger, and as I briefly just teased, ripples out to the much larger big bad plan that is happening. So the idea we're now going to get into ties back to the theory that I've been running with for a long time now, and that's the whole reverse Kingdom Come theory, which gets into how that comic book storyline shows us a world in where metahumans are rampant in that story setting, and the public have even become quite disenfranchised with the idea of the heroes of old, leading to many new age heroes to have more of this anti-hero quality to them, pretty much dropping the moral compass of the bygone era of heroes. And I firmly believed for, I would say, a couple of years now, that this is a heavy influence on the current parameters, if you will, of the DCU in present day. So the more we focus on that and what James Gunn has said, and link it even with what Nicholas Hoult has said, the more I think certain pieces of the puzzle at least begin to kind of fit together, or at least make a little bit more sense. Now this all ties back to Lex, of course, going into the Fortress of Solitude, but bear with me here as we go on a little bit of a detour. So James Gunn has stated that in the DCU, there's been metahumans and superheroes for a long time, but as time has gone on, there are more of them today than there used to be, and they're more of an issue today than they used to be. Nicholas Hoult then said in an interview, there's something about this character, hopefully, from my standpoint, where even though you perhaps don't agree with his process, there's an element where you can understand on some level where he's coming from, and why perhaps what he's pushing as his ideology is perhaps better for humanity. Now, to me at least, this further highlights what I've been theorizing about with what the world's current position is on superheroes and metahumans in the DCU. Like, it's quite likely that a lot of superheroes have lost their superhero autonomy. And what I mean by that is just truly their own sense of direction and just autonomy on how to be a hero and act as a hero without any constraints whatsoever, or any way that they feel like they have to adhere to, leading to perhaps characters like Guy Gardner, Hawkgirl, Mr. Terrific to be working at least with Lord Tech, considering that they've got the logo slapped on the center of their suits. And we also likely have other metahumans for hire, such as the Engineer and this Ultraman working for Luthor Corp, maybe even some others for the government and military, as showcased with Rick Flag Sr. and Amanda Waller. So for Superman to emerge in recent years, having his own superhero autonomy and shaking up the current status quo of how superheroes operate in this universe, let's just say that Lex Luthor probably really doesn't like that. Like, not one bit, especially if he's a particular hero that's emerged that no one has been successful in controlling or putting on a leash, so to speak. So back to Nicholas Holt's and James Gunn's comments with there being a lot more superheroes today than there used to be, and how they're more of an issue, keyword being issue today, than they used to be. I wouldn't be surprised if Lex has been quite publicly outspoken on this matter and topic, and in recent years perhaps Superman and his emergence has pushed him over the edge, and Lex is finally willing to do something about his frustrations on this matter. So with Holt's comment specifically in how he describes Lex as having this ideology that he's pushing that is perhaps better for humanity, as I've mentioned before in other videos, this could pertain to how the people and governments of the world shouldn't necessarily look to or lean upon, let alone rely upon, metahumans to solve all of their problems. Then mixing this in with just the typical psychology of Lex Luthor that we know from the comics and his disdain for what Superman represents, with various foundations of his motivations in the comics. Some of my favorite lines most recently for me in terms of what I've absorbed being from Luthor, Man of Steel, in how he describes how he views all men being created equal, and because Superman is not a man, he sees something no man can ever be. He sees the end of man's potential and the end of man's achievements. Not to mention, in a lot of stories, Lex just feels as though that he's made Metropolis into what it is today, and that he is actually, in fact, to be viewed as its savior. So when he looks at Superman out the window, this is just something that absolutely grinds his gears, given how hard he has worked, yes, nefariously, to get where he is and what he's done for the city. Even having his own protective forces through the means of Lex Troopers that we could have seen a version of in the trailer, or as seen in Superman for All Seasons, Lex's Guardians of the City, which you never know what we could get with Lex's, city plans in Gunn's Superman. Anyway, though, in so doing, he views this all as his city. And with the more and more people loving Superman, he views this as the people of Metropolis turning their backs on him and really casting him out for an alien. And as a result, tying all that into what Gunn and Holt has said, perhaps, just perhaps, we can surmise that Luthor in Gunn's Superman views the rampant era of superheroes and metahumans in the present-day world of the DCU, especially with Superman maybe being the straw that broke the camel's back for him, as limiting mankind's potential, and he just cannot quite take it anymore. So again, as I said, a bit of a detour there, but it's quite important for me to contextualize all of that as we go back into Lex storming into the Fortress of Solitude. So with Lex going into the fortress, again, I think we can all agree it's going to be fairly important. So yes, Lex could be learning more about Superman himself, as after all, knowledge is power. But it's what he learns and how he applies it and how that affects the main plot that is pretty crucial here. So maybe with this knowledge, as Fark Sakes points out to me on Twitter with my post, Lex could take back with him what he learns about Krypton and everything that is alien about the Man of Steel, which is possibly unknown to the public at this time. And as shown in the story Superman Birthright, he could expose that the Man of Steel is an extraterrestrial strange visitor from another planet, and very much so cherry pick aspects of what is discovered to release to the public to tarnish Superman's name in an overall effort to fearmonger the public against Metropolis's favorite hero, which is a title that the set newspaper articles are describing about Superman, which is another aspect that I'm sure that Luthor hates. In Birthright, Lex even questions, why do you think he operates so openly? Why do you imagine he wears a costume so bright you can see it coming for miles? To cultivate our trust. The question is, to what end? What is he really hiding? This is exactly what he wants people to feel in the public. And, maybe stirring up a panic like this could be an interesting factor to Luthor's larger plan in Gunn's Superman movie, especially with scenes of Clark trying to maybe talk to Perry about Luthor's conjecture. And as in Birthright, Perry White just kind of responds saying how Luthor has years and years of proving himself to be the leading expert in this entire field. Now, Holt's Luthor could be a very similarly decorated figure in Metropolis, just with what we know about Luthor anyway, but also the teasers that we've got of this version of Luthor in Gunn's Superman. And in Superman Birthright, the Daily Planet actually prints pages of Superman's name basically getting smeared because Luthor's plan is working. And just another important thing to remember in all of this is that everything we're discussing could tie into one of the fundamental themes that Gunn has described about the movie, with how it's about Clark reconciling his human upbringing with his Kryptonian heritage. And of course, if one aspect of Lex's plan is to fearmonger to the public, not even just the public, but the world, from the government to the military against Superman, this could be an interesting way to dive deeper into that and whether or not the world will accept Superman for who he really is. All in all, I think there's some good ideas here, and I'm not completely sold on just like the alien aspect being exposed, as for all we know, aliens are a publicly known thing in the DCU. But either way, in the larger theory of which I'm sure some of what we're exploring here could be getting close to the truth, but obviously it wouldn't quite end there. All of that could still happen in one way or another, but now there's a couple of other aspects to discuss with Luthor's potential plan in conjunction with everything we just detailed. Luthor could also walk away from the fortress with not only some important Kryptonian knowledge that can be used in ways that we've discussed, but also possibly technology that he uses in the film, some of which we could have even seen in the trailer. So this takes us to that big giant ball in the sky, and this ties into the idea that with Luthor's potential plan for smearing Superman's name, and in so doing perhaps other heroes as well, he could be the one bringing these threats into the city. Now, you may have heard me and possibly others talk about this one before, even with the kaiju and how Luthor could have lured it to Metropolis through stealing what we found out to be from toy listings, a baby kaiju, and maybe during the rescue attempt that Superman does, perhaps Luthor's intervention makes it look like Superman completely mishandled the situation. Now, interestingly, this would also be similar to things that happen in Superman Birthright as well, with Superman being affected by kryptonite for one of the first times mid-save on a collapsing bridge. And this was all orchestrated by Luthor to make Superman look bad, and in so doing, it's like, hey, look, why are we looking to superheroes like this to save us? Look at what they do. If anything, they probably make things worse. Now, with this idea, this could even link to some scenes in the trailer, like this one, where Superman appears to have a bit of a burnt up suit, possibly that relates to his encounter with the kaiju, where people maybe even blame Superman for making things worse, but really, it was Luthor maybe making things more difficult for him. But back to that big ball in the sky, this could actually even perhaps be another thing that Lex has orchestrated, but it would be interesting if it was actually something obtained from the fortress itself, or rather just something used from the fortress by Luthor that he's molded into his own threat through utilizing his scientific sorcery skills. Now, as mentioned by Snapper here on my Twitter post, a theory based on Up, Up, and Away by Busick and Johns to take a Kryptonian crystal or battery to power a modified Kryptonian weapon that he pilots to go toe-to-toe with Superman in the finale. Bonus glaze to the film if Lex is piloting it in his Silver Age costume. Now, clearly, like if Lex is in the middle of that big ball in the sky, that would be pretty crazy. But let's rewind for a second here. So sure, he could take one of the crystals of Kryptonian tech from the Fortress, similar to what we saw in Superman Returns and, well, many comic books. And another important factor to remember here is what James Gunn has said. So James Gunn teased this about Lex, being able to take that sort of Silver Age feel, that sort of science fiction approach to it with gadgets. Lex is really a sort of sorcerer in a way. He's a scientist, but he's so good at science, and I think of him as like a sorcerer. So with just that description there, this could tie into more or less everything we've discussed so far. With each threat we see in the film that we also saw in the trailer, and possibly more beyond that, which we don't yet know of, being blamed on Superman, or at least Superman making things worse. You then chuck in Superman's involvement with the conflict in Baravia, with troops amassing at the border, which incited this response from the Hammer of Baravia attacking Metropolis. You could argue that maybe Lex Luthor enlisted the Hammer of Baravia to attack Metropolis in an effort to get some backlash from the people to Superman involving himself in another country's war. Either way, I think all of this is a perfect cocktail of a plan from Luthor to really turn around the public perception on Superman and even lead him to being apprehended at one point in the movie, to even end up in one of those metahuman or superhero, whatever you want to call it, containment units. Now, for me, there are some other influences from Birthright that I would actually be quite keen on seeing in Gunn's Superman. Now, I'm not saying that Superman Birthright is outright an influence or, the movie's going to adapt it, because none of the stories are going to have that level of, effect on the movie. But Gunn, of course, is being influenced. Keyword influenced by quite a few Superman stories, such as, again, Superman Birthright alongside All-Star Superman. There's Superman for All Seasons and Brainiac and so on and so forth that have inspired the film. And in that Superman Birthright story, not only does Lex use kryptonite on Clark for the first time, well, technically he was exposed to it when he was a kid, but as in his Superman days at least, and Clark doesn't know what the heck is going on there. But it implements a lot of cool new ideas about how Superman even learns major things to do with his Kryptonian heritage for the first time in a bit of a different way. And it really is making me think, could we get something like this from James Gunn's ideas, or implementation at least, in the movie? So with Luthor's relentless research into Superman in Birthright, he also learns about his home planet through using a quantum aperture in space-time. And eventually, he informs Superman in a confrontation with him that his home planet is Krypton, and of course, it was destroyed. Now, this doesn't mean it will be just like this, or if this will even happen at all, but it's just interesting to see what Luthor can actually pull off scientifically in this movie, and what could come out of that, and the idea that Clark learns more about himself in this movie, again, reconciling his human upbringing with his Kryptonian heritage. Despite having been Superman for a few years already, it's actually something I've entertained before, in how, what if Kellex, the Fortress of Solitude Kryptonian robot, is perhaps all Clark has had as a link to Krypton this entire time, and he hasn't maybe really been educated on all things Krypton as much as we're used to seeing, such as maybe with Jor-El filling him in on everything when he first discovers the Fortress. Who knows what Gunn could do there? Obviously, there's a lot of new things that he could bring into this iteration. But for Luthor to discover something because of him being hell-bent on taking down Superman, but he's like, okay, I've inadvertently learned this the more I've looked into him, but then educate Clark on it, but in a sadistic way, that would be quite crushing. I can really imagine David Corenswet's acting and just reaction to be just like that of in Superman Birthright. So with just the way Luthor is in these stories, I can definitely see Lex's immeasurable conviction in learning more about Corenswet Superman through entering the fortress and learning a lot that he can weaponize, among other things, like even studying outside of the fortress, such as having likely a whole operation dedicated to studying Superman's abilities. Maybe that's what the beach encampment's about in the trailer. And with Lex being, with Luthor Corp, probably an expert scientist, maybe astrobiologist, like who knows? It just further compels him to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and circling back round to the smearing Superman's name. And this is how you have other factors coming into the movie. Maybe the engineer believes she's doing the right thing. Ultraman, or whatever the heck you want to call him, Ulysses, God knows what, henchman dude, we're gonna have to wait and see. The Daily Planet, I think that would be fairly clear where they would go. They'd be helping restore Superman's name, helping reveal what Luthor Corp is really doing, what Lex is really doing. That could even be why Mr. Terrific is escorting Lois to that Luthor Corp beach encampment and things like that. Maybe she's onto a trail and helping clear Clark/Superman's name. All of this good stuff. But I've been rambling for a while now, and there's probably more Luthor stuff that I didn't even mention, but I do feel like that's like a general, rambling of, what is Lex doing as he's going into the fortress? And, when we springboard from there on out, like, what is Luthor doing in the fortress? It leads to all of these other ideas. So I would love to hear your thoughts on my thoughts down in the comments below. Let me know if you want to hear more separate topic conversations like this on the Superman movie. You can let me know as well by leaving a like on the video. Consider subscribing to the channel, of course, for more updates and bonus videos like this. But that is everything. So I'm going to love you and leave you again. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your support. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And I'll see all of you fellow Kryptonians in the next video. Goodbye.